you've committed that the FBI will not be politicized. So here's your first test. Will you commit that you will not tolerate the firing of the FBI agents who worked with the special counsel's office on these investigations?
Senator, I appreciate the time to visit with you.
It is a yes or no answer, and it is your first test.
Senator, every FBI employee will be held to the absolute same standard, and no one will be terminated for case assignments.
And I'm not going to accept that answer, because if you can't commit that those FBI agents will be protected from political retribution, we can't accept you as FBI director.
All FBI employees will be protected against political retribution.
Those individuals deserve to be protected from Trump retribution. That was your first test. You failed.
What we have just witnessed in this chamber is nothing short of a 5-alarm fire burning through the very foundations of American law enforcement independence. And I need you to understand with absolute crystalline clarity that this moment right here is where the Republic begins to fracture under the weight of authoritarian consolidation. Because when Senator Richard Blumenthal pressed Kash Patel on whether he would protect the FBI agents who worked on Jack Smith's investigation into Donald Trump from retribution and termination, Patel could not deliver a clear commitment, could not muster even the most basic assurance that career law enforcement professionals would be shielded from political vengeance. And that refusal is precisely the confession that tells us everything we need to know about what is coming for federal law enforcement under this administration, because Patel said that he wasn't aware of any plans to punish FBI agents involved in the various Trump probes, and that no one will be terminated for case assignments during his hearing. But the moment Blumenthal demanded a direct commitment to protect those specific agents who investigated Trump, Patel's evasiveness exposed the calculated nature of this purge, and Blumenthal's rage is the rage of someone who has seen the warning signs before, who understands that the politicization of federal law enforcement does not happen overnight, but rather through incremental surrenders like this one, through procedural cowardice dressed up as neutrality, through the kind of bureaucratic double-talk that lets authoritarians gut institutions while claiming to restore them. And before I go further, let me tell you what has already happened since that hearing concluded, because the FBI took personnel action against 3 special agents who worked in connection with former special counsel Jack Smith's probe of Donald Trump, firing at least 2, and the agents were not fired until Tuesday, on what can only be described as a targeted assassination of career professionals who were simply doing their jobs, and the firings came after Patel disclosed that the FBI in 2023 obtained phone toll records of 8 U.S. Patel senators as part of its investigation into Trump's attempt to overturn his 2020 election loss, and the agents were fired after Kash Patel disclosed that Smith's team obtained phone records of members of Congress, which Republicans then weaponized as justification for terminating FBI personnel who were conducting a legitimate criminal investigation, authorized by the Department of Justice following all established protocols. And here's where it gets truly dystopian, because one of the fired FBI employees, a combat veteran who was months away from becoming eligible for retirement, was called back to the office after having left for the day, and informed of the dismissal, which is not just cruel, but strategically designed to maximize the chilling effect throughout the Bureau, to send an unmistakable message that no amount of service, no amount of valor, no amount of dedication will protect you if you dare to investigate the president. But wait, because this isn't merely about 3 agents. This is about the systematic demolition of law enforcement independence across the entire apparatus of federal justice. A top Justice Department official on Friday ordered the firing of at least 8 senior FBI executives and a sweeping examination of the work of thousands of other Bureau employees, including all those who worked on investigations tied to the Jan 6, 2021, attack on the U.S. Capitol, and the scale of this purge is staggering. We are talking about potentially thousands of FBI employees across the country who were involved in work related to investigations stemming from the Jan 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol, being reviewed for termination, and at least 6 senior FBI leaders have been ordered to retire, resign, or be fired by Monday, and the senior officials are at the executive assistant director level or special agent in charge level, and include those who oversee cyber, national security, and criminal investigation, which means Trump is not just firing people who investigated him personally, he is decapitating the leadership structure of the nation's premier law enforcement agency to ensure total loyalty to one man rather than to the Constitution. And I want you to sit with the historical weight of what is happening here, because the FBI's Washington field office is folding its Federal Public Corruption Squad, the same unit that aided Jack Smith's special counsel investigation into President Donald Trump. and the field office has 3 units that work on public corruption issues, but this one, known internally as CR-15, was deeply involved in the Bureau's Arctic frost investigation, which was the precursor to the Smith probe into efforts to overturn the 2020 election results by Trump and his allies, and that investigation resulted in one of the 2 federal criminal cases against Trump, both of which were dropped after his election. So we are witnessing the systematic erasure of the institutional capacity to investigate political corruption at the highest levels, a calculated gutting of the very mechanisms designed to hold presidents accountable for criminal conduct. This is yet another sign that it's open season for political corruption, and the administration gutted the public integrity section, neutered the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., and is now shuttering the FBI's preeminent Federal Public Corruption Squad, according to former Justice Department officials who understand precisely what is being destroyed here. Now let me take you inside that confirmation hearing for a moment, because the exchange between Blumenthal and Patel was not some abstract policy debate. It was a man attempting to extract a basic commitment to the rule of law from someone who had already decided he would not make that commitment, and Blumenthal's declaration that this was Patel's first test and that he had failed it was not hyperbole. It was a diagnostic assessment of someone who has spent decades in the Senate watching nominees attempt to navigate these questions, and when Patel said every FBI employee will be held to the absolute same standard and no one will be terminated for case assignments, but then refused to commit specifically to protecting the agents who worked on the Trump investigations, he was deploying the classic authoritarian technique of making general assurances while preserving the flexibility to target specific individuals, and the fact that some were notified while Kash Patel, President Donald Trump's pick to lead the agency, sat answering questions from senators for his confirmation hearing Thursday, reveals the contempt with which this administration views congressional oversight, the brazen willingness to conduct the purge even as Patel was assuring senators that no such purge was planned. And here's what makes this particularly chilling from a historical and constitutional perspective, because the complaint asserts that FBI Director Kash Patel indicated directly to one of the ousted agents, Brian Driscoll, that he knew the firings were likely illegal, but was powerless to stop them, because the White House and the Justice Department were determined to remove all agents who had helped in investigations surrounding Trump, and Patel told Driscoll, "The FBI tried to put the president in jail, and he hasn't forgotten it," according to a lawsuit filed by 3 senior FBI officials, which means Patel himself acknowledged the illegality of what he was being ordered to do, and proceeded anyway, which is not the behavior of a principled law enforcement professional, but rather of a political operative following orders from above, regardless of legal or constitutional constraints. And at his Senate confirmation hearing, FBI Director Kash Patel promised to protect employees from improper political removal, but once he arrived at the Bureau's headquarters, the lawsuit alleges Patel deliberately chose to follow directives from the White House rather than federal law, which transforms this from mere political calculation into conscious complicity in the destruction of institutional norms that have protected FBI independence for generations. Let me now connect this to the broader pattern of authoritarian consolidation, because what we are witnessing is not isolated vindictiveness, but rather a comprehensive restructuring of federal law enforcement to serve partisan political ends. These efforts began in earnest during the first week of Trump's second term, as he pulled security details for top officials from his first term, reassigned and dismissed career DOJ officials, issued executive orders weakening protections for federal workers, and directed his Justice Department and Office of the Director of National Intelligence to open broad investigations into Biden administration weaponization of law enforcement and intelligence agencies, and the president also issued an order pardoning more than 1,000 people charged in the Capitol attack, and his Justice Department fired officials who worked on the federal criminal investigations into Trump, which represents a totalizing vision of government power concentrated in service of protecting one individual from accountability, and Trump ended the post-Watergate norm of independence for the Department of Justice and weaponized it to investigate his political opponents, calling them scum, and his administration publicized actions against local leaders, judges, and federal officials who opposed his agenda, along with what the New York Times described as people who have simply gotten on the president's bad side in an attempt to stigmatize them, which should alarm anyone who understands that the erosion of prosecutorial independence is a prerequisite for authoritarianism. And the irony that should infuriate every single person watching this is that Trump has spent years claiming that federal law enforcement was weaponized against him, while there is no real proof that Biden played any role. He repeatedly avoided publicly commenting on the cases, citing the need for Justice Department independence, and Garland said he didn't feel pressured, but Trump is now openly and flagrantly weaponizing the Justice Department and the FBI to punish his enemies in ways that are documented, public, and shameless, because on a recent Saturday night in September, the president took to Truth Social and demanded that Attorney General Pam Bondi order the Justice Department to prosecute 3 of his most reviled enemies, New York Attorney General Letitia James, former FBI Director James Comey, and California Senator Schiff, and quickly it became clear that the public post was an error, meant as a private message to Bondi, and now 3 weeks later, 2 out of 3 of Trump's targets on the post have been indicted, which represents smoking gun evidence of selective prosecution, directed by the president himself, and Eric Siebert was fired after he told senior DOJ officials he didn't think there was enough evidence to proceed with the case against Comey, and his replacement, 36-year-old Lindsay Halligan, is Trump's former personal lawyer and has no prosecutorial experience, and Halligan has done what her predecessor would not, going alone before the grand jury during her first day on the job to seek charges against Comey after all the other lawyers in the office refused to go with her. Which tells you everything you need to know about how these prosecutions are being manufactured through the replacement of ethical prosecutors with partisan loyalists willing to abuse grand jury processes. Now I need to draw your attention to the ideological architecture supporting this purge, because Patel has alleged recent cases against Trump were politically weaponized against the president and Republicans, allegations officials within the agency have previously denied, and in 2023, Patel published a book titled Government Gangsters, in which he alleged the FBI has become so thoroughly compromised that it will remain a threat to the people unless drastic measures are taken, and he has pledged to take on government officials and members of the media who he said lied about American citizens who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections, which reveals that Patel is animated by conspiracy theories about election fraud and deep state sabotage that have been thoroughly debunked, but which now form the ideological justification for purging career professionals. Patel's memoir, Government Gangsters, calls for weakening civil service job protections, and Trump praised the book as a roadmap to end the deep state's reign, and in September 2024, Patel vowed to close the J. Edgar Hoover building, the FBI headquarters, reopen it the next day as a museum of the deep state, and take the 7,000 employees that work in that building and send them across America to chase down criminals, which demonstrates that the institutional demolition is the point, that Patel's vision is to fundamentally transform the FBI from an independent investigative agency into an instrument of presidential will. And if you think I'm being hyperbolic, let me give you the comparison that should terrify anyone with even passing knowledge of American history, because this isn't the first time an FBI director has been driven by a desire to suppress the rights of people perceived to be political enemies, and Hoover, director until his death in 1972, operated a secret FBI within the FBI that he used to destroy people and organizations whose political opinions he opposed, and we spent decades building norms and legal structures to prevent another J. Edgar Hoover from using the FBI as a personal political weapon, but at the FBI, Director Kash Patel has conducted a political purge, firing the highest officials at the Bureau and thousands of FBI agents who investigated alleged crimes by Trump, as well as investigated participants in the Jan 6 attack, which represents a return to the darkest chapters of FBI history, where loyalty to an individual, rather than fidelity to law, determined one's survival within the institution, and fired FBI officials stated in their recent lawsuit over those dismissals that Patel had told one of them it was likely illegal to fire agents because of the cases they had worked on, but that he was powerless to resist Trump's demand, which means Patel is worse than Hoover because at least Hoover operated under the pretense of institutional independence, whereas Patel openly admits he is following White House orders even when he knows those orders violate federal law. Let me also address the absolutely critical question of what happens to the FBI's actual law enforcement capacity when you gut the institution of experienced professionals, and the 3 plaintiffs are among the most senior and lauded FBI agents to have worked at the Bureau in recent memory. Brian Driscoll won awards for bravery and valor, and led hostage rescue teams before briefly serving as acting FBI director this year. Stephen Jensen ran the Washington field office and managed some 2,000 employees working on national security and violent crime, and Spencer Evans oversaw high-profile investigations, including a Tesla Cybertruck bombing outside a Trump hotel in Las Vegas this year. According to their lawsuit, which means Trump is not firing incompetent bureaucrats, he is firing the most decorated and capable law enforcement professionals in the country, because they had the misfortune of being assigned to cases that investigated presidential misconduct. They were willing to sacrifice those people who had done nothing all of their lives but to protect the American people, for no other reason than to be some sort of emblem of revenge or retribution, according to their attorney Abbe Lowell. Patel not only acted unlawfully, but deliberately chose to prioritize politicizing the FBI over protecting the American people. His decision to do so degraded the country's national security by firing 3 of the FBI's most experienced operational leaders, each of them experts in preventing terrorism and reducing violent crime. Which should make clear that this is not about improving the FBI, but about crippling its capacity to function independently. Now let's talk about the broader implications for democratic governance, because when you fire FBI agents for investigating presidential misconduct, when you demand lists of employees who worked on January 6 cases, when you shut down public corruption units and replace career prosecutors with partisan loyalists, you are not reforming law enforcement. You are creating a protection racket for political elites. The FBI Agents Association said the actions contradict the commitments Patel made to the association ahead of his Senate confirmation hearing, saying Patel said FBI agents would be afforded appropriate process and review and not face retribution based solely on the cases to which they were assigned, and dismissing potentially hundreds of agents would severely weaken the Bureau's ability to protect the country from national security and criminal threats, and will ultimately risk setting up the Bureau and its new leadership for failure, which represents a professional organization desperately trying to protect its members from political persecution. The personnel moves come as hundreds of FBI agents who were assigned to investigate the January 6 U.S. Capitol attack, and Trump's alleged mishandling of classified documents are bracing for the possibility that they could be forced out or punished, similar to what has happened to dozens of career Justice Department lawyers. And Trump has falsely accused agents of abuse in their court-ordered search of his Mar-a-Lago home and of their treatment of Capitol rioters, and some agents say the criticism belies the fact that FBI agents and supervisors can't choose which assignments they are given as part of their job, which underscores the fundamental injustice of punishing people for following lawful orders to conduct authorized investigations. And I want to return to that moment in the hearing, because Blumenthal's fury was not merely about Patel's evasiveness. It was about what that evasiveness portends for American democracy. It was about understanding that when nominees refuse to make basic commitments to protect career professionals from political retaliation, they are announcing their intention to transform law enforcement into an instrument of partisan warfare, and Blumenthal has seen enough confirmation hearings to know the difference between someone genuinely committed to institutional independence and someone who has already decided to serve as a political operative. And when he said those individuals deserve to be protected from Trump retribution, and that was your first test, you failed it. He was not grandstanding. He was delivering a verdict based on decades of institutional knowledge about what happens when law enforcement agencies lose their independence, and the fact that Patel could not give a simple yes to protecting agents who investigated Trump tells you that he had already received his orders, that the purge was already planned, that the confirmation hearing was merely theater while the machinery of retribution was being assembled behind the scenes. Now consider the chilling effect this creates across the entire federal workforce, because Bove later demanded a list of FBI workers who took part in the investigations of Jan 6, 2021, and Driscoll refused, the lawsuit alleges, saying it would put national security at risk and violate federal civil service laws and rules, and eventually, under pressure, Driscoll put together a list of 6,000 people that included employee identification numbers, not names, in order to protect the FBI workers from retaliation and threat, which means we had an acting FBI director trying to protect his workforce from White House demands that he knew were legally dubious and potentially dangerous, and the fact that he was ultimately forced to comply and then fired anyway demonstrates that there is no safe way to resist this administration's demands for loyalty. Agents who carried out the Mar-a-Lago search in the Trump classified documents case have already faced threats after their names were made public by Trump supporters on social media, the Justice Department has said, which means the danger to these agents is not hypothetical, but real and documented, and the administration is nevertheless proceeding with efforts to identify and punish them. Let me also address the Republicans who enabled this, because the Senate confirmed Kasha Pal as the new FBI director on Thursday, in a Senate vote that largely fell along party lines. 51 senators voted in favor of Patel's confirmation, against 49 no votes, cementing him as the director of the nation's leading federal law enforcement agency, and 2 high-profile Republicans, Sen. Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Sen. Susan Collins of Maine, notably voted against his confirmation, which means the vast majority of Republican senators looked at Patel's record, heard his evasive answers, understood the implications for FBI independence, and decided to confirm him anyway. Senator Susan Collins stated, The nomination of Kash Patel to serve as director of the FBI comes to the Senate against the backdrop of recent personnel actions at the Department of Justice, including the resignations of several career federal prosecutors who felt they were being instructed to act in a manner inconsistent with their ethical obligations, and Mr. Patel has made numerous politically charged statements in his book and elsewhere discrediting the work of the FBI, the very institution he has been nominated to lead, and these statements, in conjunction with the questionnaire sent to thousands of FBI employees, cast doubt on Mr. Patel's ability to advance the FBI's law enforcement mission in a way that is free from the appearance of political motivation, which represents one of the few Republican senators willing to state clearly what everyone knows to be true, that Patel's confirmation represents a fundamental threat to FBI independence. And the Democratic opposition was both fierce and prophetic, because I oppose Mr. Patel because he is dangerously politically extreme. He has repeatedly expressed his intention to use our nation's most important law enforcement agency to retaliate against his political enemies, according to Senator Dick Durbin. And I am absolutely sure of this one thing. This vote will haunt anyone who votes for him. They will rue the day they did it, said Senator Richard Blumenthal, and he added, to my Republican colleagues, think about what you will tell your constituents and family about why you became voted for this person, who will so completely and utterly disgrace this office and do such grave damage to our nation's justice system, which will stand as one of the great warnings ignored by a Senate majority that chose party loyalty over institutional preservation, and history will record that Democrats saw this coming, warned about it explicitly, and were overruled by Republicans who either shared Trump's authoritarian vision or lacked the courage to resist it. Now let's examine the specific ways this has already manifested in concrete acts of retribution, because the abstract threat has become material reality, as the New York Attorney General, James's office opened an investigation in 2022 into whether Trump inflated the value of his real estate holdings. The case went to trial in 2023 and resulted in a $500 million civil fraud penalty. In May, the FBI opened a criminal investigation into James for alleged mortgage fraud, and James said this is nothing more than a continuation of the president's desperate weaponization of our justice system, which represents retaliation so transparent that it requires no interpretation. The Attorney General who successfully prosecuted Trump civilly is now facing federal criminal investigation for dubious mortgage fraud allegations, and Polta, director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, has used his 3 million followers on X to reinvent the sleepy mortgage regulator as a platform for political combat. Polta has elevated allegations of mortgage fraud against two of Trump's top antagonists, New York Attorney General Letitia James and Sen. Adam Schiff, and both are now under criminal investigation, which shows how Trump has weaponized obscure regulatory agencies to target his political enemies through manufactured criminal investigations, and the pattern extends far beyond law enforcement, because the Justice Department on Friday subpoenaed a former CIA director and 2 former FBI officials as part of President Donald Trump's ongoing revenge tour, and a grand jury in the Southern District of Florida issued subpoenas for former CIA Director John Brennan, who led the agency from 2013 to early 2017, as well as Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, who were officials with the FBI until 2018, which represents the systematic targeting of everyone who investigated Russian interference in the 2016 election. It also announced a special project to investigate prosecutors who had previously brought charges against January 6 United States Capitol attack rioters, and launched a weaponization working group to review and investigate officials at both the state and federal levels who previously investigated Trump, and provide the White House quarterly reports on its findings, which institutionalizes retribution through the creation of permanent government mechanisms dedicated to investigating Trump's enemies. And this is not normal. This is not how democracies functions. This is how authoritarian regimes consolidate power by making clear that investigating the leader will result in your own investigation and potential prosecution. So when Blumenthal confronted Patel in that hearing and demanded a commitment to protect FBI agents from retribution, he was not asking a hypothetical question. He was demanding that Patel choose between the rule of law and personal loyalty to Trump, and Patel's refusal to make that commitment was itself the answer. It was the moment where he announced to anyone paying attention that he would prioritize Trump's political interests over FBI independence, and the firings that followed within days of his confirmation prove that Blumenthal's fears were not only justified but insufficient, that the scale and speed of the purge exceeds even the dire warnings that Democrats issued during the confirmation process, and now we are left with an FBI director who admits the firings are likely illegal but proceeds anyway, a Justice Department investigating political enemies on orders from the president, and a federal workforce terrified that doing their jobs professionally might result in termination, prosecution, or worse. And this brings me to the fundamental question of what we do about this. Because outrage alone is insufficient. Moral clarity is necessary but not sufficient. We need to understand that the battle for FBI independence is the battle for whether we will have an apolitical law enforcement system capable of investigating powerful people regardless of party, and the loss of that independence represents one of the key inflection points in democratic decay. That is the moment when the nominal democracy becomes a competitive authoritarian system where elections still occur, but where state power is systematically deployed to disadvantage political opponents. And if you read his Truth Social, he makes it very, very clear that he sincerely believes that the DOJ has been weaponized against him, and that he was treated unfairly, and that this is just retribution, and Trump is creating what's called competitive authoritarianism, a political space that sits in between pure authoritarianism and liberal democracy, and you still have competitive elections and all the trappings of a liberal democracy, but at the same time, you have those in political power tilting the political landscape in their favor. According to political scientists studying democratic erosion, which means we are witnessing a textbook case of how democracies die, not through dramatic coups, but through incremental erosions of institutional independence that eventually make it impossible for anyone to challenge those in power. So Senator Blumenthal's confrontation with Kash Patel was not theater, it was diagnosis. It was the attempt to force into the open what everyone already knew, that Trump's FBI director would serve Trump rather than the Constitution, that the independence of federal law enforcement is being systematically destroyed, that career professionals will be purged for the crime of investigating presidential misconduct, and that we are entering a period where law enforcement serves as an instrument of political retribution rather than as a neutral arbiter of justice. And the fact that Patel failed that first test tells us everything we need to know about all the tests to come, and the agents being fired right now are the canaries in the coal mine, and the only question remaining is whether we have the institutional resilience and political will to resist what is coming, or whether we will watch passively as the machinery of justice is transformed into the machinery of revenge.